Greetings and welcome to the latest episode of the Uncharted Territory podcast with myself, Dan Astin-Gregory, and my co-host, Sam X. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Jordan Walker, who is the founder of Bitcoin Collective. And we're excited today to have our first thoroughly focused conversation about Bitcoin, its importance, where it is on the journey of its adoption curve, and what does the future prospect hold. Jordan, fantastic to have you with us today. Welcome to the Uncharted Territory podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Definitely. There's a lot of ground we could cover here, but I think what would be lovely to do is start by, if you could give us a bit of a potted history to where you started with the Bitcoin Collective in particular, what your aims and objectives were when you first started and how things have evolved. That'd be a good place to kind of kick us off.
Yeah, definitely. So things actually didn't start as the Bitcoin Collective. We started as the Crypto Standard. So we actually started as a podcast, and it was in 2020. Is me and my co-host at the time, Jim Duffy. We were really interested in cryptocurrency and diving deep into what fiat was and the macroeconomic environment. And we were studying this and we were like, well, we talk about this all the time to each other. So why don't we just record it and put it out there for other people to come on this journey with us so we can essentially share the journey with our listeners. So that's what we've done. We started the Crypto Standard podcast, and I think we done near enough 80 episodes and looking at different crypto projects, looking at macroeconomic environment, getting guests on. And then as we were going down this rabbit hole, we were looking at what's the main problem here? The main problem is our current financial system, is the fiat system. And what's the best solution out of all of these cryptocurrencies to actually fix that? And clearly for us, it was Bitcoin. So we were like, okay, well, this is the one that we should be focusing on. And that's where we pivoted. And we were like, we're not really interested in all these other cryptocurrencies because we believe that they are just businesses. Whereas if you look at Bitcoin, that's where we were like, okay, this has actually got a chance to revolutionize the financial system as we know it. So we pivoted down that route, and that's where the Bitcoin Collective was born. And we were talking a lot about America. America are doing this, America are doing that. And there's a lot of adoption in America with what's happening in Texas and Wyoming. A lot more states now compared to what it was back then, even a year and a half ago. And we were like, okay, well, let's try and do something in the UK. So we asked a few of the podcast guests that we'd had on if they would be willing to come over and speak if we put a conference on. And they said, yes, we'll come over and we won't charge a penny. And that was quite a shock to us, actually. We were like, you won't charge? Are you sure? Did you type that wrong? And they were like, no, we'll come over, won't charge anything. So that's where we started the idea of a conference, and it really snowballed. Like once we had those 5 speakers, because they were really well known in the space, that meant that we could get more speakers, and it just really ramped up. So we had to move location and pick a bigger venue. And then the conference turned into the UK's largest Bitcoin conference. And that it was a magical event. We had nearly 600 people at this event for our first time doing it. We put it together in a really short space of time because, we just didn't give ourselves a lot of time. A lot of people were like, "You're mad! Like, why are you doing this to yourselves?" But everyone really rallied around it, and that was the beauty of it. Is people are passionate about something, and that thing is Bitcoin and the problem with the financial system. And they really rallied behind it, and they helped us pull this conference off. And so that was in Edinburgh October 2022. We done that, and now we are on a path to doing another one and growing the Bitcoin Collective. So I think that's us up to date of where the business is.
Amazing story, and I can relate to the challenges of putting on an event. We're putting on a similar sized event right now, and again, similar timeline with similar challenges. So yeah, I relate to that. But lovely to see people rallying behind it. Now, Sam and I have talked a fair bit on this show about the kind of problems that we see with the fiat system, but I'm curious in terms of how, firstly, what you saw as the major problems of the fiat system that led you to then selecting Bitcoin as the kind of vehicle that you see as the revolutionary path. So could you outline what you see as the key problems with the current system?
Yeah. So I mean, there's this saying that money makes the world go round, and it touches so many different aspects of life.
Mm-hmm.
Money, like, we use it day to day, we rely on it, and if that is broken, if it's corrupt, if it's manipulated, that then stems through the whole of society. So we were like digging down, like it's kind of like an actual physical rabbit hole. We were really digging right down, and we felt like we hit the core, and the core of the problem was the money. And 2020 was a big turning point because of the pandemic. We printed a lot of money, like an insane amount of money. And this is where it kind of flipped for a lot of people, not just me, like a lot of people. It flipped, and it made them realize, wow, who's printing that money? Where's that money coming from? And where's that money going as well? So that manipulation of the supply, that was the key to unlocking the education into Bitcoin, essentially, because Bitcoin's very different to that. Whereas with with fiat currency, you can print as much as you want, or as much as the central bank and government want. With Bitcoin, you can't do that. So, like, I was seeing this problem of printing way too much money, and then there's something over here called Bitcoin, and you can't print more money. You can't print more Bitcoins. So there's only ever 21 million Bitcoin. And that was when I was like, okay, well, this is very interesting. This seems like it fixes the problem. It totally flips this on its head. It totally flips the idea of being able to print money on its head. But let's investigate what this looks like. And I'm not saying I have the answers to this, but what society would look like if our money was deflationary instead of inflationary.
Yeah, I've got my mind is flowing with all kinds of questions that Sam, do you have anything you'd like to add or comment?
Well, no, I think I wanted to start back on what's beautiful about your conference discussion there, Jordan, how it came together. It really underpins the fact those speakers came for free. It underpins the ethos of why people are passionate about educating, A, about Bitcoin, but B, about Bitcoin in relation to the monetary system that we have right now. And I think, I've met lots of people who've shared that same journey, that learning about Bitcoin has been really interesting because it made them learn about the system we have in place. So it's about, as I've always said, I'm passionate about educating people about the financial system because we're not brought up to understand what's going on. And as you said there, it runs as theme through all our lives, everybody across the world. It's fundamental, yet no one really understands, I say no one, lots of people who studied it, plus the people who created that system understand it, but people aren't educated, so they're not knowing what they're dealing with. And it's exactly that. I had the same experience when I dived into it. Almost, if you have a flawed monetary standard, that leads to, a flawed moral standard. Almost, it flows through, and so it is absolutely critical. And one of the big, important aspects of having good money is having scarcity. And like you said there, the fiat system, the pure fiat system, once we left, gold backed, the dollars, or even sterling backed pounds back in the day, we've gone to pure fiat currency backed by nothing. And there's a real issue if the cost of creating new money is very cheap, as it is in the fiat system. It's basically zero because they're not even printing it, they're just typing it onto the screen. Whereas even with Bitcoin, even though the supply, like I said, is hard coded 21 million, even in terms of bringing the new ones into the supply through mining, that does take energy and cost money. So there is an energetic output to bring more money into the system, which again a lot of people don't understand. And any system that means you can just create new money at cheaper than it costs to, have that money, that leads to incredible corruption and problems and a system that is unsustainable. So yeah, it's absolutely key. And I'll let you jump in, Dan. But that's what struck me, and I think that education side, Jordan, is so important. And the fact those speakers came for free shows that the passion, the ethos at the basis of Bitcoin and the movement, which a lot of people don't understand because they just see it as a digital bit of a digital craze or some internet money made up. There's far more to the ethos, A, in what it does, and B, what it's reacting to. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump in. Sorry, before you go, Dan. Yeah, like that was the incredible thing, is these speakers coming for free, and I want to just highlight that these speakers weren't just all Bitcoin speakers. We had, like, what I'm passionate about is making Bitcoin relevant and relatable to people outside that haven't really seen this. So, as you said, education. I want to educate people and inspire them around what this is, this Bitcoin thing that people are talking about. So it was really important to bring in speakers that weren't necessarily just known in the Bitcoin space. Yeah. So we had like I don't care who it is I'm educating. Like, I just want to educate them on what Bitcoin is. So we had the likes of Coutts Bank, we had Fidelity, we had the UK government all speaking on stage and being educated and educating others around maybe why they haven't adopted it yet, or how up to speed they are with developments. Because don't get me wrong, this is really hard to keep up to speed with what's happening because this technology is moving so fast. So yeah, I just wanted to add in, like, that's where we sit, is we want to bring as many people on the fence that don't know about Bitcoin and just slowly educate them about what it actually is.
And it's a journey, as you said, when you start showing your crypto podcast, you take people on a journey, because that's why me and Dan called this the Uncharted Territory podcast, because we're all on a journey and we're all moving into uncharted territory, and it isn't a going A to B overnight and here's the answer. You do have to be curious and learn along the way. So bringing people on that journey and continuing the learning is exactly what we're passionate about as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, so Jordan, you mentioned that the podcast, and Jim's been on one of my other shows actually, and we talked about the show. But you obviously did a lot of episodes, a lot of conversations, not exclusively focusing on Bitcoin at the time, and you've outlined some of the properties that you believe are really important within Bitcoin as the kind of almost antidote to the fiat system. What led you to that conclusion? Obviously, you looked at a lot of different other technologies and assets over that time. Was it an obvious decision for you? What factors do you think make Bitcoin the kind of front runner in terms of the possible challenger here?
Yeah, well, at the start, it obviously wasn't obvious to us. But as you said, Sam, we were going down that journey. It was the start of our journey. And this is where it's ended up. And this is where it ends up for a lot of people, is they'll enter into cryptocurrency and then look at what's the real problem, where's my pain, and then Bitcoin is the one that a lot of people end up at. So what was the real deciding factor for me doing that is when I started deep diving into these crypto projects that I was looking at, I was asking myself, what problem is this fixing? What real life problem is this fixing? And a lot of them I couldn't give an answer to. I could give some spiel that their marketing team had said, but when I actually look at it, I'm like, is that actually fixing a problem? Like, is this actually going to work? And then when you look into a lot of crypto projects, there's a team behind them. I really got a problem with this, is that they should be viewed as, a lot of cryptocurrencies should be viewed as businesses. they've got teams behind them. They've got venture capitalist money behind them. And so you've got CEOs, founders, a marketing team is the big one. That's when I was like, okay, well, why do they need a marketing team? Why, if they're trying to be a decentralized money, why does that need a marketing team? Isn't that just the government all over again? Isn't that just like, that's the job of central banks and government of doing that? So are we just not applying that in crypto here? But it's for the profit of a small group of people that have got into this cryptocurrency early, and they've pre-mined a lot of the coins. So yeah, that was my main worry, was that there's teams behind these, and there shouldn't be, if we're trying to build a neutral currency that has the potential to be a world reserve currency, there should be no team behind that.
I think that makes sense. And we've looked at it through that lens as well, actually, in terms of when we're assessing the utility of these different projects that are emerging. And I think that's the important distinction, actually, because whilst there are plenty out there that have no utility, there are plenty out there that do, particularly those in the blockchain space, looking at how some of those technologies could transform industries. But you're right to then categorize them as businesses that are working within industry spaces, not looking at them as a currency option that could transform the financial system. That's a very clear distinction, but it's not made in any of the jargon or terminology.
Which is why we're always talking about digital assets, and cryptocurrency can be a bit of a misnomer. That actually you need to say that, yeah, there are currencies, and Bitcoin is the king of that and the original, and then a lot of these things are digital assets covering a whole spectrum of things. So it's important to make that distinction, as you have done, Jordan. Yeah,
that's the hard thing as well for people. As we were saying, I think before we came on, that it's almost two things that you're trying to educate on is, well, for me anyway, is fiat and Bitcoin, the difference between them, but then you've also got this Bitcoin and the other 22,000 cryptocurrencies. So you're fighting two education battles, essentially. And that's a lot for people to take in. So that's why I think just going down the route of what's Bitcoin and why is it better than our current financial system is the simplest approach. But a lot of people do get brought into all the other cryptocurrencies because of these marketing teams that are drawing in and saying that you can get X amount of yield. But because I'm trying to talk about money, you shouldn't be getting yield on it. Like, that shouldn't be a thing. So yeah, that's where I sit with that.
Yeah, interesting. Apologies, I think my camera's just froze there for a minute, so do let me know if it's still playing out. It should be fine on the local recording. Yeah, I think that's an important. Maybe that's something you can pick up in your next conference, Jordan, because I think the fact that they're all called cryptocurrencies, the currency is the misnomer. It's not an accurate descriptor for what it represents. And whilst Bitcoin has been around for some time now, and other projects that followed have been around for some time, it's still really, to a degree, I'd be interested to see, when we talk about adoption, where you think we are in the adoption cycle. But to me, it still feels like we're in an infancy stage in a large number of ways. And I think having those discernments around what is a cryptocurrency, what is actually it's almost like we've got these trading standards in the food products, and you can call a certain type of cheese based upon where it's from, or a champagne can only be called champagne because it's from the Champagne region. It almost feels like we need to go through that process of definition or redefinition as the industry evolves to help with that clarification, because actually that would probably solve a lot of the what are we talking about problems. So maybe that's a subject. But what I'm more interested in talking about is the path to mass adoption. And I know that's what you're keenly focused on. And what was interesting to hear your view that Bitcoin could potentially become a global reserve currency, because we've alluded to on our show, and we haven't done a dedicated episode on this yet, but we will, is on the kind of decline of the US dollar in its current position as leading reserve currency. So what do you believe that Bitcoin could actually become a global reserve currency, and what do you think would need to happen in order for that to occur?
Yeah, so the way I view it is the internet gave us the transfer of information globally for free. And now this thing has come along called Bitcoin, and we can transfer value globally at near free because of what's getting built on top of Bitcoin. So yes, like I view it as we're on the same trajectory as the internet. So Bitcoin, I view as just on the same trajectory, that it is getting adopted, and you can see that now with all of the institutions wanting to buy it, the amount of Bitcoin that are getting bought up on exchanges is, I don't have the facts and figures, but if you Google that, like, it is dramatically getting eaten up on these exchanges. So I kind of sit back and I look at what happened with the internet in the early 90s, mid 90s. And if you look at some of the articles, some of the news reports around that time, there's a lot of people laughing at it, people saying this isn't going to work, this is stupid. And the network effect comes into play. And that's where it really expands. And I think Bitcoin is now starting to, if you look at the innovation adoption curve, so you've got like the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and laggards. I believe that we've been through the first stage of the innovators. We've had the cyberpunks that have really tested this. Like, there's so many events that have happened to date that have tested Bitcoin and Bitcoin's security. And it's withstood all of that. And now we're kind of moving into the mainstream because we're getting people building on top of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin naturally is very slow and expensive. It wouldn't work as a world reserve currency, or it wouldn't work as a currency that you could use day to day. You could go down to the shop and buy a coffee. It couldn't work like that on the base layer. But now we've got people building on top of it, which is scaling Bitcoin. And now you can do that. And you can do that at nearly free. So I can go down to a coffee shop that accepts Bitcoin and pay with Bitcoin. And there's no banks, nobody in between that except Bitcoin. And that's the beauty of it. And that's where we're heading, I believe, anyway. And that adoption is ramping up massively now. And I'm seeing a lot more people accepting Bitcoin because they're getting frustrated. I think you need to be in enough pain to look for a solution. And unfortunately, in the UK and Western countries, we're not in that much pain. Yeah, we've got 10% inflation, but that's nothing. That is nothing compared to if you look at the likes of Venezuela, Lebanon, Japan. Like, these are just off the charts, and they're the people in pain. So they're going to be the ones that adopt this first, not us. They're the ones that need this. A lot of people are unbanked. I actually read this week that there's 1 million people in the UK that are unbanked. And that shocked me. But back to my point, that we're not going to be the ones that adopt this on a retail level. We will on an institutional level, because that's how we roll. Exactly. With everything that's happening with BlackRock, Fidelity, Valkyrie, all these ETFs going through in America, and then they're going to come to the UK as well. So in an institutional level, we will try and get in, but the public aren't in enough pain yet. And that's why concentrating on the global south is what we call it, is that, so South America, Africa, they're the countries that are in a lot more pain. So they're the ones that are going to adopt Bitcoin a lot sooner than we will anyway. So there's different adoption curves is what I'm trying to get at. And in the UK, we are behind on that adoption curve because we are not in enough pain.
Well, I think it's important, Jordan. I think, probably the work you're doing and what we're doing is to try and educate people that, in a sense, although the people aren't feeling the pain, it's there. And it's almost
Very
like
true.
it's almost like we are in as much pain, but the people don't realize it. They haven't actually felt it. Under the surface, it's all there. And a lot of those institutions understand, that they're moving towards that and they want to get hold of it and shift out of fiat currency in terms of, storing their value. So it is that kind of illusion of comfort in these, in inverted commas, more developed countries, where people have this idea that it's all right, but actually under the surface, this financial system is completely broken, is being propped up, has been propped up arguably for quite a long time, and has continued to be, so that, and I would say, if you get that education, understand that, move before we move into the extreme pain. I always say, like, the Titanic's going down, Jordan. Do you wait till it's actually, going, and then there's all that pulling you down, or do you get off into your life raft now, and do the work now? And that's what the early adopters and the people who get clued up do. And I think that's really important to educate people about, rather than leading to that point of, absolute necessity or desperation, because then it becomes a bit of a mad rush, and people aren't maybe as clued up, and they're acting out of fear. And I think that's why getting ahead of this curve, is really important. Even if it's just about, firstly, we say educate yourself about what's happening in the financial system, and then what steps you can take, like looking at Bitcoin as another option, and the possibilities and the extra ability that can give you. And like you said there, the number of people, we know they're being debanked. I know news coming through for people in the UK freedom movement being debanked this week, and people not able to sell their products anymore because payment suppliers like Stripe or PayPal are blacklisting certain, natural health products. So yeah, that ability to transact without a state intermediary, without any intermediary, part of the Bitcoin network, is so important to understand, and beyond investing in Bitcoin. Now that was my other question, Jordan, that often people ask, well, how will it, do I invest in it or do I transact in it? And I think it's important you brought up that point that, as it is, it is a bit clunky and old and slow and a bit expensive, but that's part of the decentralized beauty of it.
Mm-hmm.
But that there are these other layers being built on top that will make, like I said, very cheap, very quick transactions more possible, to be actually transacting it rather than sitting it as a kind of digital gold.
Yeah, I think a lot of people also misunderstand Bitcoin just because of the narratives that have been played in the past, and the pace of the technology, how fast it's moving, that it's not just this asset that you buy now. You can actually use this in day-to-day life, and you can transact in it. And that's something that's still fairly new within the last 2 years. So I don't blame people for not knowing about that. But the only side that they're seeing is this store of value, whereas now it's moving into a usable form of money, which it needs to be translated through all of the education that we're doing, that you can actually use this day to day. So that was a really important thing that we done at the conference, is we gave everyone a bit of Bitcoin, so then they could go and transact in the city and buy a coffee with Bitcoin. So you can actually see the real use case. It's not just this thing that, whenever I say I work in Bitcoin, a lot of people just assume that I sit there with a trading chart and I'm just in my mum's basement and I'm just watching this.
Wanting to buy a Lamborghini and move to Dubai. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, all the kind of stereotypes. Exactly right, and I think that's so crucial to bring it into tangible day-to-day living for people. People are always asking, how do I use it? How can I transact in it? And I think so that's really valuable work, mate, at every level.
Yeah, because
I think where people might get confused, though, Jordan, because I think this is important as well, because there's been a lot of talk about the Lightning Network this week, which is potentially enabling faster, more efficient transactions using Bitcoin. Could you explain how that works? Because a lot of people think, I've got my Bitcoin, I can, even if I understand I can spend it. What's the distinction between these different layers of technologies that are built around Bitcoin to help people understand how that works in layman's terms.
Yeah,
we're not
just
talking technical terms.
Yes.
just simplicity is you've got the base layer of Bitcoin, which is secure and decentralized. So in previous podcasts, have you gone through the blockchain trilemma?
Not in those terms.
not in those terms. I think it's great to bring it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Dive in for us.
I'll go through it very quickly. So on a blockchain, there's three components to make the perfect blockchain, let's just say. So it's scalability, decentralization, and security. But nobody has ever figured out how to get all three yet. So a lot of blockchains will choose the security the decentralization and the scalability, which then that means that you're compromising on the security because you can't really have all three yet because nobody's come up with that. So like the likes of Ethereum, you can build on Ethereum really easily, but you are compromising the security, so it can get hacked a lot easier. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's picked the two, which is decentralization and security. So on the base layer, that means it's really slow because there's no speed there. So people are now building on top of it, and that means that let's just say it's connected down to the base layer for simplicity. So it is secured by the base layer, but this new layer on top can move very fast at the speed of lightning, let's say. But it's not just lightning that's getting built. There is a lot more that is happening on top of this. And it's similar to the internet as well. If you look into how the internet was built, you've got the base layer of the internet, TCP IP, and then people build on top of it and they build applications on top of it. It's just the exact same in Bitcoin, but you're using it for our money. And that's a good way of referring to it. That's why I always use the internet as we're on the same trajectory. It's fairly similar when you break it down, looking at it. Not from a technical standpoint, that's not my expertise, but when you're explaining it to someone, they can relate to the internet because a lot of people have been through the adoption curve of the internet and they're like, oh, okay. So I remember that. I remember Netscape. I remember this happening. And now we're just saying, well, that's happening, but now with our money. And yeah, anyway, you can now build on top of Bitcoin and it's making transactions a lot cheaper and faster. And just being able to, as I said, buy a coffee. Like I want to spend my Bitcoin. That's not many people say that, but I want to spend it because I believe that it could be a currency in the future if more people adopt it. So yeah, I don't just see it as solely an asset that I buy and I hoard it. I mean, I do that to a certain extent. I've got my Bitcoin savings account is what I call it. But at the same time, I want to spend it and increase the network and get people talking about this because the Lightning Network's only 2 years old, or has only been fully developed. Well, not fully developed, but fully functional for 2 years. So yeah, that's where we're at the moment, and it's a journey for Bitcoin as well. You need to think of that. It's not this pure finished product. We are still building on it. We're a human race that likes to innovate, evolve, and that's what we're doing with Bitcoin as well. Is that it's still getting built, and people need to remember that. Maybe it's not perfect yet, but we're going in the right direction.
So it seems like these new layers will help with the scalability problem that you outlined and the speed of transaction, which will hopefully liberate the ability to use it as a currency, as a means of exchange, as well as a store of value. But I suppose we're in this kind of uncharted territory, like this grey space where there's an absence of a regulatory environment so that you and I can transact in Bitcoin, we can transact in pounds, euros, US dollars. But what do you think the future holds? What do you think some of the challenges are to that prospect?
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of challenges. Don't get me wrong, because the phrase or the quote that comes to my head is, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And I think we're at the bit where they fight you. I think we're still going through that phase. And what does the future hold? Like, you're seeing the collapse of the fiat system as people wake up to this, and more people day to day are waking up to, yeah, there is a problem. Like, what's this clown show that's going on? And more people are just looking for a solution. So how that will look in the future, there is thousands of different paths. I obviously have no answer, but I believe that Bitcoin is going to be the world's reserve currency and the native currency for the internet, because it was built on the internet. It was like all the cyberpunks at the start, like they were on the internet, on forums, building this, adding to this, and it's grown on the internet. So I believe the end goal is Bitcoin as a world reserve currency, and that's used globally around the world. Yeah, I think that answers your question, but please tell me if it doesn't.
I'm glad you said that you don't know, because that's the truth, and none of us know. And sometimes you get people wanting to answer. We go, well, how's it going to play out? But that's the whole point. That it's a journey, and we can't. But I think it's really important to learn along the way, and the more you learn, I'm sure, like us, Jordan, you're not attached to a certain outcome because you're ready to pivot and learn along the way and look at new solutions. And that is the reality of these changing times and taking proactive action. There isn't just like, if we do this, this will happen. We don't know, and that's where being a pioneer. I think there's no certainty, but there's huge rewards in that on all levels, like of improving systems and learning new skills and getting ahead of the curve. And like you said, I think the only thing I'm sure of is that exactly that comparison to the internet is so important. I often talk about it, that's where we're going, and that absolutely we had the internet of information and we're moving to the internet of value, moving value across the internet. Bitcoin plays a huge role in that, as will other digital assets. And I think I always talk about, Andreas Antonopoulos talks really well about, in his talks, he was a great educator in the early days of Bitcoin, that if you think back to the early days where the internet came through your phone line, well, now your phone's on top of the internet, so it's flipping. The technology is something, you're squeezing it through, an old technology, and actually now the old technology runs on top of, and that's the base layer, and that's what's going to happen with Web3 and blockchain. And so that's really important, that you understand this is growing, and some people argue at a faster rate than the internet even. Yeah. But how it exactly plays out, I don't get attached to either. And I think it's important not to think you have to know it's going to play out, because that can stop you on the journey and stop you progressing. The fact is, we know we want to move towards better solutions away from that fiat system. That is an ongoing roadmap and an ongoing journey. And by being active participants in that, wherever it ends up, we are having a positive effect of looking at other options rather than being defeatist or saying, well, it's no point because, me and Dan often get going, what if this, what if that? Well, the what ifs can paralyze you and stop you. I want to innovate and move forward regardless. And I think that ethos is really important to get out there.
100%. That's a really important point as well. And I think being able to use your imagination, and so, for example, if I told you, let's say the early 2000s, when you had your Nokia, if I told you in 20 years' time that you would have a supercomputer in your hand that unlocks by looking at it, I would have told you to get lost. I would have said that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And what's that going to look like in 20 years from now? We're going to look back at this point and be like, oh wow, a lot of people are going to look back and be like, oh wow, I never imagined that we could go that far, that fast.
Totally. People forget the shifts that happened almost. That's why I
Yes,
like to,
yeah,
like you
yeah.
like to point them out, is that look at even post Nokia into when the apps first appeared. We're talking about, even the rise of social media, whatever we think of it, 07, 08, that rise of the apps. Well, now we're talking about, decentralized apps, dApps, and we're look what happened between 08 and like you said today. I mean, unbelievable shift, and a lot of people forget what's happened. And I'm totally with you. The same will be happening in blockchain technology on all fronts. So that's a really important point for people to realize, that the growth and the shifts that are going to happen are, and like you said, you need to be, and the pioneers are people who have imaginations and then keep building and seeing what's possible and go on that journey. It's going to be extraordinary.
Yeah, and the network effect is one component, but then there's the technological leaps. I remember reading about the early. Now we take for granted now that we can, watch a film, stream it instantaneously on our any device, television, mobile, tablet, laptop, whatever. But there was a time where the internet technology was too slow for that to happen, and there was a company that was basically the equivalent of Netflix, that preceded Netflix. They had all the things in place. They had major deals with all the film creators, actors, the TV producers. They locked it up. They essentially had the capacity to do the capability to do what Netflix has done today. But the technology wasn't ready. We were still partly working on dial-up, early stage broadband. So the company failed. It had the right idea, wrong time, because the technology wasn't ready. So again, your point around how the leaps in technology, the epoch shifts that create and liberate new technology. So technology gets enabled when new technology emerges as well. So Netflix was possible because the broadband technology reached mass adoption, and then fiber and other forms of internet transmission that enables speeds, literally at that lightning speed. So now we can download an entire movie in seconds, microseconds. So that's where I think it's exciting, because you talk about Bitcoin, it's almost like the base layer. It feels, as Sam's example, it feels like in 20 years' time we'll look back and see the technology Bitcoin was built on. It's like the dial-up, But so we have to use our creative faculties to imagine where this can go. But I also think the important point I love the way you framed it, is that we are in that fight stage now. It's a regulatory battle. Day to day, we're hearing these conflicting stories between the big players coming into the market, which of course will liberate the market, BlackRock, etc. But at the same time, regulators trying to restrain it. But in many ways, they're restraining some of the things that you're talking about. It's the gray areas, the lack of distinction between what's a security, what's a commodity, what's a business, what's a currency. All of this fight phase will actually even out, level out some of those difficult conversations that need to be leveled out. But there will also be challenges ahead. But there's another quote, be so good that they can't ignore you. And that for me is part of the adoption curve, is that, and part of the reason I bang the drum on this about Bitcoin is that we're leaving it to chance if we're not starting to hold it and use it, because it is being part of the adoption phase. Yes, it's it's clunky and complicated now compared to being able to download your internet banking app and these various different ways of transacting. But that's going to change. That is going to change. It's all going to become easier. It's just a matter of time, as with every technological adoption curve. At the beginning, it's created by technological people for technological people. That's why we get the early adopters in the way that you described, the innovators who are usually technically minded. But then the business people come in and go, I really start to understand this now, which is what you're trying to do, because by the education coming through, people go, now I get it. And when they get it, they can go, I can now see how we could actually make this simpler. I can now see how we can get all three of those things, the scalability, the decentralization, and the security to work. When people come into the market, that problem-solving, innovative mind starts to actually see the path ahead. But it's getting over those initial barriers through the types of education that you're describing, what we're trying to achieve here as well, that will help that process. And I think that to me is the key when you bring it back to education and inspiration, because that really is, I think, the key that will unlock Bitcoin's potential.
Yeah, Dan, I want to jump in and say that, we've often talked about it. Yeah, there are challenges, but there are always more challenges to a more sovereign path, and a more decentralized and a more freedom-based path. Those challenges are baked in. That's part of that journey. And how the control structure want to always corral people and keep them in, their animal farms or keep them controlled is by giving the easier option. So like you were saying there, yeah, absolutely. It's simpler to transact perhaps in their old models, but as we know, it's simpler with all those caveats, controls, and you'd be debanked and you've got no sovereign power in that fact. So these options are slightly more complicated, take more learning, but they've got greater sovereign freedom benefits. And you speak to somebody who's been debanked or deplatformed from PayPal, Stripe, all these different payment providers. They're not going, this is a nightmare using Bitcoin. They're delighted to use Bitcoin. They've had to do a little bit of work to learn how the payment works, but it's not rocket science, and they can do it. They're delighted with that, and it has real necessity. And we're seeing that. I've always said that. I've seen the last 3 years, particularly, the real tangible use case, like you're talking about, Jordan, for people who've been in areas where the SWIFT hasn't been down in Russia. I always talk about a story, somebody's had that ability to transact peer-to-peer, cross borders when they couldn't normally, with even fiat currency potentially in there, even with cash, struggled to cross borders, or with gold. With Bitcoin, they could travel anywhere because, they're outside of jurisdiction. So there are all these qualities, that set it aside and set it above the easier option, and it gives you more freedom. And the easier option is how they get people, because they want people just to go to easy, comfort and simplicity. But that's walking into their world, and that's the world they build. So yeah, absolutely, new solutions, freer solutions, more empowering solutions do take more work, but that's part of the journey, and that's what we're embracing. And if you're on a path to that, then I think you absolutely need to embrace that work.
Yeah, because I love this. This is like my jam. This is because what you said, Dan, about how this is like we're shifting from the technologists and the cypherpunks that have built this, and now like how do we take it to mass market almost, and how do we educate more people around this? Because at the moment, as Sam said, like it's difficult to learn about it. It's a lot, but it's really important to learn about it, because you are also learning about the current system, which we don't get taught at all. But yeah, like that's where it feels like we're at. Is, I don't know if you read the book Crossing the Chasm.
Yes, yeah.
Fantastic book, and that's exactly where it feels like we are. Like, how do we communicate this thing that will revolutionize the way that we transact globally in a way that the early majority and the late majority will understand, the 80% or whatever it is of humanity? How do we communicate that? Because we've got the solution here that's working really well for us. Then how do we then communicate that and get it over across the chasm, it's called?
Yes, I think one of the
sorry,
go ahead, Sam.
No, well, I just think the crucial thing is to educate people that they're doing it in a proper way. Because what I see, my kind of thesis and what's going on at the moment, Jordan, is that the mass adoption that the control structure may be looking at is people doing it through their banks, i.e. having exposure to Bitcoin, but actually not holding themselves, which again, Bitcoin has all its qualities, but if you're not using it yourself and taking self-custody and transacting peer-to-peer, then in a sense, you haven't got that important aspect to it. And I think that's what we're seeing, which is they want to make it a safe way. We'll look after all that. They won't. So a lot of the new people coming in, maybe won't be interacting directly with the tech. And that's really important to do, I think. And I think that's where, I see the danger is that that's what the control structure are sort of building in place, which is maybe make it hard for people to get their fiat currency in themselves. But actually, if you go through their systems, and we see this with the launch of the new EDX exchange, which is kind of their response to the FTX collapse, in my view, all an inside job and shenanigans and clown world stuff. but that really, what that is saying, absolutely, you can get involved with Bitcoin. Now we're flipped our narrative saying it's good, like we're seeing them scaring retail investors out, and now saying actually it's good because we're building a system where you can come in, but we control it for you. And that's the antithesis of this point about responsibility, self-custody. So I think educating about that before people are corralled into another form of getting involved in Bitcoin that actually isn't really getting involved with Bitcoin, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that is a big danger, is a lot of these, like the neobanks that are now offering cryptocurrency, that you're not in custody of that. The bank is. No. You do not own that. And that is really dangerous, because there's no point of really holding it, because you've got a third party involved in it, and they're so entrenched in the current financial system that if that goes down, then you've lost all the Bitcoin that you had. So education into how do you actually hold your Bitcoin, and it's getting a lot easier. That's the really good thing, is like, I've been in cryptocurrency for like 6 years now. So I'm saying cryptocurrency as a whole. And the progress that's been made in those 6 years is phenomenal in lots of different aspects, but security and how you manage your Bitcoin, that's getting a lot simpler to understand how this is actually done, which is a positive thing. And it's really nice to see the evolution play out and the message get simpler, more simple.
Yeah, I agree. Easy and easier to spend as well, which makes that makes the adoption curve easier. But I think there's a couple of things that I think are challenges, and we've touched upon both of what I perceive to be challenges. One is, you mentioned the global south, and when you're in double, triple digit inflation, you're in pain. You're feeling that, and that pain drives adoption of things like this. And we're not feeling that. So I call that the 0 to 1 problem. Like, how do you go from 0 to 1 from realizing you have a problem? Because it happens everywhere, whether you're in a bad relationship and you're in the comfort zone, or your level of health isn't optimal, but you haven't had a heart attack yet. You haven't had the thing that's given you the leverage to do something about your health. But almost in every life area, we stay at 0 in that comfort zone. And it's not until something happens outside of us that we suddenly go, like in the economic state of those countries, that goes, oh, actually, we've got a real problem here. Because that didn't just emerge overnight. It's not just like, oh, triple digit inflation. That's systemic. And it's the same with ill health or systemic problems in a relationship. It's how do you help people to go to 0 to 1 without having to go through the trauma, without having to, and I've been to lots of business talks over the years, and people tell their story of woe to win, the struggle and sacrifice they made to get where they get to. But why do we have to wait for that trauma? Why do we have to wait for the pain? Why can't we see it? So the challenge for me is always about, how do we see the latent pain? Because it is there. Absolutely. It's like the same with ill health. It's the markers start to show themselves, but it's not until we get sick that we pay attention. And that's the challenge. That's one of the challenges I perceive. The second challenge I perceive is the kind of hype curve around crypto as a whole, because everyone wanted to pay attention to Bitcoin when it was on that massive bull run and it hit those all-time highs. But they're not paying attention because of Bitcoin as a solution. They're not paying attention because of the fundamental problems with the fiat system. They're paying attention because they see it as a get-rich-quick scheme that's going to enable them to get generational wealth. And we've talked about this countless times on the podcast. That's when people, the people on the street, the people who wouldn't fall into that technologist, innovator class, come in. They come in because they see this gain, but they're not. And now, to be fair, some people will go in and they'll stay in and they'll start. It is that gateway drug, if you will, to understanding the deeper problem. It's the gateway to understanding the problems of the fiat system. For a lot of people I know, that has been the gateway. But for a lot of people, other people I know, they tried to make a win on Bitcoin and they suddenly crashed. Even if they don't lose their initial investment, they cash out and they check out, and that's it. Bitcoin's over for me. Or sometimes they lose a lot and that's it. So they're not actually seeing Bitcoin for what it is. They're seeing it as a get rich quick, overnight flash in the pan. And therefore they miss the entire story around fiat currency and the problems that they represent. So it's really two sides of the same problem, and helping people to understand the problem before it becomes too painful. Right. So I don't know how we get around that. But I'm curious on your views on that, George.
Yeah. So the way I see it, like, a lot, you're right, 100%. Like, I agree with everything you're saying there. Is the majority of people will come for the price, and once you've been in Bitcoin long enough, you don't care really about it. Like, I never check the price. It's not really a thing that I do, and I used to at the start. I would always check the price and be like, oh, how much have I made today? Or how much have I made in the last 5 minutes, actually? It was more like...
Yes.
So it is as you said, like a gateway drug for understanding is coming through the price. And I think that's where we need to catch people and try and tell that story. Is we're potentially going to go through a bull run, coming up, because we've got the Bitcoin halving next year. And lots of people that aren't interested in Bitcoin or cryptocurrency or fiat, the fiat system, are going to come to it because of the greed that we've got inside us. They're like, I can make money here. And this is where the education is so important. So everything we're gearing up for is, how do we bring this group of people into Bitcoin, but educating them with the right things that they need to understand to stay for the long term and not cash out, like you said. And understanding, how the world works. So bull runs are really, really good for education, but also really bad. And this, you need to catch as many people as you can and tell them this story about Bitcoin. It was built in 2008, 2009, or deployed in 2009 off the back of the financial crisis. It was built as a solution to our current monetary system. A lot of people don't know that. Like, that's really simple, but a lot of people don't realize that. They just think, oh, it was this thing that was made for the dark web and sending drugs, whereas that's not what it was built for, and that's what it was used for in its infancy. Now it's matured, or it's maturing, and this is the journey that people need to go on, and bull markets are very important to bringing these people in and crossing that chasm, in my view anyway.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with the founder of Blockworks, which is another publisher that looks at the overall industry, and they were saying, the traffic to their website during a bull run is astronomical, but equally, in a major bear, where there's a major crash. So it's when there's any volatility in the market, that's when there's. But I think that volatility over time will stabilize. I think that's almost an inevitability as well. I think this is, again, a function of its early cycle stage. But there are some, but it's also interesting when you look at economic. I don't want to divert into this economic theory, but that's a much deeper rabbit hole to go down. But the expectations theory, which suggest, because people now expect the halving event, because that's what's happened. There's a trend so far to drive another bull run. I think it will, but over time, that process may actually dampen out or do the opposite, because life tends to follow what we expect it to do in economic theory. So it's if it's the same when we had the financial crash. When people were talking about the possibility of bank runs and bank crashes before they'd happened, it then creates the sentiment in the market that it switches from greed to fear. And once you swing the dial far enough one way, which is a sentiment, it's a perception, an emotional reaction, then action follows. So I don't want to deviate too much into what the possible features are around the kind of halving events, but I think that stability will eventually come with the mass adoption. And I think the important thing is in the store of value, because this is where it directly correlates with how we spend our money now, because we don't just use cash to transact. We also use it as store of value. Okay, a lot of people spend month to month and they don't have the store to value, but that's a whole different conversation. But it has the capacity for store value and transactional value. But of course, as we've touched upon during this episode and others, that store of value, because of its inflationary nature, means that what you're holding is actually dwindling over time. So it's, again, Bitcoin offers a solution to both of those problems.
Yeah.
And
I think that's an important point, Dan. Exactly. You don't have to be in either camp of saying I'm not looking at the price, I'm going to be spending my Bitcoin, or you can have a savings account, that you hold, and you can have your current account. You could be using it for both those modalities. It's important to remember that. It's not like always people get caught in binaries, either or. But look, the option, like you said, are you just comparing it as a currency compared to your fiat currency? And what benefits does it have on both sides of that fence, both as a store of value and as a transaction, as a decentralized means of transaction without a state intermediary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like with Bitcoin, it's not there yet because it's so volatile still. So people in high inflationary environments, it's not the perfect solution yet as a transactional currency, because it could be up one day and then down the other day. But as a store of value in the long term, it fixes that problem. So until we have until it levels out a little bit more and it becomes less volatile, then that's where the argument for stable coins comes in for high inflationary countries. And I think that's really important for people to see as well, is that stable coins are an important thing in the cryptocurrency world. I'm not advocating for them, but I'm just saying that people do need stability, and Bitcoin can't always offer that because it's volatile. So that is one side of the argument as well of why stable coins should be adopted, and like the likes of Tether or USDT are also coming in, and they're big Bitcoin advocates, the team there. And yeah, I just think that's a really important point to make, is that you don't have to be one or the other on anything, really. It's just picking in your situation, your own situation, because I will be different to someone living in Venezuela.
Yeah.
You just pick it on your own situation in the place that you're living in.
Totally. I think that's the key. Sorry, you understand the tools, and then you can decide how they fit into your situation. And I'm totally saying it's always important that it resonates with you, and that you see what value and what use case it has for where you are, how you operate, and then it's your decision, isn't it, Jordan? You have to decide how that fits in. And like you said, there are many positives to it and bonuses, but the first step is people don't understand the options. So if you don't understand the options of what exists, then you're not going to bring them into your life and use them. You've got to understand the options first, and then you decide. And again, that's why I talk about crypto a lot, but I'm not a crypto purist. You look at other options, because I like to have tools for all sorts of scenarios, and I enjoy having being able to pivot and use them for their different benefits. I think that's what's important. Again, first step, understand what tools there are and how you can use them.
Yeah, definitely. This is so important, and I think there's a lot for people to get their head around. But I think this current phase is going to be really, really important. And the comparison that we've made throughout this episode around things like the technological, the developments within the internet, and the .com era, because again, there's comparisons, easy to make comparisons to the .com era, where huge price volatility at the time, bull runs, a lot of noise, a lot of hype, but underneath all that hype, there was some real valuable companies, Amazons and Apples of today, some of the biggest companies in the world born during that time. But that volatility, once we're out of that initial cycle, has stabilized, but there's still growth. And I think that's my long-term thesis around Bitcoin. I think we'll continue to see the volatility until we reach a point of further mass adoption. We're coming up to the kind of closing parts of the conversation now. There is a couple of things, Jordan, mind. We've talked about Lightning and things like that kind of layer on top of this. I'm just curious about your views on some of these forks around Bitcoin, around things like Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, these things that are emerging. What are your views on these things?
I tend to not look at them. They come into the camp of they're just a cryptocurrency for me. Just another one of these cryptocurrencies. Yeah, I need to be careful what I say because of someone behind one of them. So yeah, I don't pay any attention to them because I see how they've been built, and I believe that they're no competition to Bitcoin as a form of money. So then I've looked that far, and I don't need to look further. If they're not competition towards this, then I don't see the point in spending my time looking down those rabbit holes and researching them anymore. But yeah, I don't want to say too much around them.
Yes, fair enough.
I know
yeah.
someone.
But do you think could they, in the same by the same breath, something like Bitcoin Cash, could that also be something that actually accelerates the path towards peer-to-peer transactions at scale? Could they be, again, gateways to something like Bitcoin as a purer?
I guess they could be a gateway towards it, like any other cryptocurrency. So my gateway towards Bitcoin was Cardano, and I went down that rabbit hole. And I realized it wasn't the right rabbit hole, so I jumped out of it and went down the Bitcoin. So I guess that could be a gateway for some people, and I feel like a lot of people have to go on this journey. Have you? I'll call it. I won't swear. But there is a phrase that's used, but it's called the crypto horseshoe. And I don't know if you've come across this, where a lot of people start out with cryptocurrency, looking into cryptocurrency. They'll go. Let me restart that. They'll start out Bitcoin, sorry, and then they'll get dragged into all the other cryptocurrency projects, and then they'll find their way back up to Bitcoin. So then it forms like a horseshoe, essentially.
Yes.
A lot of people will, if you say cryptocurrency to someone, they'll be like, oh, is that Bitcoin? People will still associate cryptocurrency with Bitcoin. So that's usually the one that they've heard of first. They will know a little bit about. And then what I see is all these cryptocurrency marketing teams kick in and take people down different rabbit holes to learn about what they're doing. But then people slowly realize this isn't the one that's fixing the problem that I care about. And they come out of that horseshoe and go back to Bitcoin. So yeah, that's the trend that I'm seeing a lot, and a trend is what I've been on as well.
Yeah, I think that's.
I think it's always but it's important. We always talk about to see. I always say, see Bitcoin. It stands alone. And when I look at the rest of the crypto market, it's another. Because always some people say, "What's happening in crypto, Sam?" Well, where do you begin? Because, like you said, that's a whole world of Web3 and companies developing things. And again, there are really fascinating things, and I'm involved in that space. I'm really interested in it, but I view areas of even my own portfolio as completely separate. They are completely different beasts, and so it's a different world almost. And yeah, Bitcoin does stand alone. I do see a lot of the altcoins as that's an investment world that you're looking at, but it's it's a new. They're new ecosystems that you can invest in. Essentially be a kind of an early venture capitalist to certain ecosystems. But like you said, John, it's not. It's a whole different world.
Yeah.
And it mustn't be looked at as comparing like for like.
Yeah.
Like you said, there are companies involved, centralized, in charge of their own tokenomics, whereas Bitcoin is this, like you said, no marketing team, a hard-coded supply, and it's important to make that differentiation. And view apps doesn't mean that you shouldn't get involved with those, but it's for a different reason almost, and have that clarity.
Yeah, precisely. Like, as long as if you were educated enough to know what Bitcoin is, so you've done enough research into Bitcoin and you understand what it actually is, the story of Bitcoin, then it's up to you to decide what you do with your money. And it's not up to me to push Bitcoin on you. I'm here to educate people on what is Bitcoin and why, you need to make that distinction between Bitcoin and all the other cryptocurrencies. And if you decide to invest some money because you want to try and make some quick gains and risk it in cryptocurrency, all the other crypto digital assets, then that's your decision. I've got no say in that. And I think a lot of people get caught up in that.
Yeah, but it's important to know the hows and whys. Once you know why you're in a certain, then you're in. I always talk about people being in an empowered state. You know why you're in a certain part of the market, and that's your positive choice, and you know why you've chosen those different paths. So again, it's all about the baseline education, because you're on a solid footing across the board.
Exactly.
I think that's a good place for us to end. So the last thing to ask you, Jordan, is it was very exciting what you've been doing with the Bitcoin Collective and events coming up, and I know you've recently moved to London and had some contact in the local area there as well. Tell us a little bit about where people can find out more about the Bitcoin Collective and keep in touch with what you're doing.
Yeah, so you can go to our website, which is thebitcoincollective.co.uk, or follow us on Twitter, is the best place to get it. So we're at BitcoinConf UK. And yeah, we've got some very exciting announcements coming up that I've been working on. So two projects that are bigger than I've ever tackled before. So we will be releasing them in the next few months. So you can sign up on our website to our email newsletter, and that's probably the best place to find out what we're up to, and then attend any of our next events.
Amazing. Yeah, great work, Jordan. Perhaps we'll have you back on once those big projects are in the public domain so we can hear all about them. So yeah, good luck with those. And yeah, please do head over to bitcoincollective.co.uk to check out Jordan's work and the latest developments and joining the mailing list there. And if you're interested in keeping in touch what we're doing here at the Uncharted Territory podcast, please do subscribe on whichever whatever platform you're watching or listening on, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, etc. And if you'd like to find out more about our work, go to weareelevate.org/reset. Jordan, Sam, this has been another fantastic conversation. Really great to explore Bitcoin today. Thank you so much for being here with us, and best of luck with your projects.
Thank you very much.
Hope to meet you in person at the next. Hope to meet you in person at the next conference, Jordan.
Yes, definitely.
Indeed.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me.